There are moments in life when exhaustion reaches a depth that ordinary rest cannot touch. It is not the kind of tiredness that disappears after a long night of sleep or a quiet weekend away from responsibility. It is the kind that settles deeper, somewhere beneath the surface of the mind, where hope has been stretched across years of waiting. If you are listening to this message right now, there is a strong possibility that you know this kind of fatigue very well. You have carried expectations for a long time. You believed something meaningful was promised over your life, something that would eventually unfold, something that would make sense of all the sacrifices, the long nights of prayer, the silent persistence when nobody else understood what you were holding on to. Yet as the months turned into years, and the years passed without visible results, a quiet question began to grow inside your mind. You kept moving forward. You kept doing what was right. You kept showing up every day with determination. But somewhere deep inside, there was a whisper, asking whether the promise you believed in was ever truly real. This is the moment that many people reach when the weight of waiting becomes heavier than the strength of certainty. It is not that faith disappears, but that faith becomes tired from carrying hope without confirmation. The world sees you functioning normally. They see you working, smiling, fulfilling responsibilities, living what appears to be a stable life. But they do not see the inner tension, the private moments where you stare into the silence and wonder why the answers have taken so long to arrive. They do not see the quiet battles you fight with discouragement, or the effort it takes to keep believing when the evidence around you suggests that nothing is changing. What you are experiencing is not weakness. It is the natural consequence of carrying a promise through a long season of invisibility. Many people think that the hardest part of a journey is the beginning, when everything is uncertain. But in truth, the most challenging moment often comes later, when you have already invested years of effort and still cannot see the finish line. This is the stage where exhaustion begins to blur the difference between patience and doubt. It is the stage where people start wondering if they misunderstood the voice that once inspired them to step forward. Yet the truth being revealed here changes the entire interpretation of your story. The delay you have experienced was never a signal of rejection. It was never a message that you were forgotten or overlooked. Instead, the delay functioned as protection. There are moments in life when receiving something too early can damage the very purpose it was meant to fulfill. If a seed is exposed to harsh weather before its roots grow strong enough to support it, the same sunlight that should nourish it can destroy it. Timing is not just about when something begins. Timing is about when something is ready to survive the weight of its own growth. In the same way, the season you have been walking through was shaping something inside you that could not be rushed. The patience you developed, the humility you learned, the endurance you cultivated in silence, all of these elements were forming the internal structure required to sustain what is coming next. What looked like stagnation from the outside was actually preparation unfolding in places that nobody else could see. Heaven does not operate according to the urgency of human expectations. It operates according to readiness. And readiness is often built through processes that feel slow, hidden, and sometimes unfair. But the message being spoken to you now carries a powerful declaration. The season of testing is reaching its conclusion. The long stretch of refinement that shaped your character is coming to a close. The silence that once felt confusing is giving way to clarity. What once appeared to be a locked door is about to reveal itself as a gateway that was waiting for the precise moment when you would be strong enough to walk through it. The waiting did not erase your promise. It strengthened the foundation beneath it. And now the invitation being extended to you is simple but profound. Release the weight of the struggle you have been gripping for so long. Let go of the tension created by trying to force an answer from the silence. Your role in this moment is not to strain harder or push further. Your role is to prepare your spirit to receive what is already moving toward you. Sometimes the most powerful transition in life happens not when a person fights harder, but when they finally relax their grip on the battle and open their hands in expectation. The reward that is approaching may not arrive in the form you imagined when the journey first began. In fact, it may appear in ways that surprise both you and the people who once doubted the path you were walking. But the important truth remains unchanged. The long season of waiting was never empty. It was the quiet construction of something greater than you could have recognized while it was happening. And now you stand at the threshold of a new chapter. The moment just before breakthrough, where exhaustion gives way to restoration, and where the years of unseen preparation begin to reveal the purpose they were quietly building all along. The hidden pain of long delays often begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, long before anyone else notices that something inside you is changing. From the outside, your life may appear stable, even ordinary. You continue waking up in the morning, fulfilling responsibilities, speaking kindly to people around you, and maintaining the rhythm of daily existence. To friends, co-workers, and even family members, nothing seems dramatically wrong. They see a person who is functioning, surviving, and continuing forward. Yet beneath that surface, there is a deeper emotional landscape that few people ever witness. Inside, the weight of waiting has slowly accumulated over time, layer upon layer, until it begins to press against your thoughts in quiet moments. It is not always loud. Sometimes it appears as a subtle heaviness when you sit alone with your thoughts. Sometimes it arrives late at night, when the world becomes quiet and the distractions of the day disappear. That is when the questions begin to surface. Questions that you rarely say out loud, because you have spent so long protecting your faith from doubt. Many people who carry a calling or a promise from God experience this internal tension during long seasons of delay. The outward life continues, but internally, there is a sense of standing still, while everyone else seems to be moving forward. You watch opportunities appear for others. You hear stories of breakthroughs, blessings, promotions, and answered prayers happening in the lives of people around you. And although you are genuinely happy for them, a quiet voice inside your heart begins to whisper another question. Why does it feel like my prayers are disappearing into silence? Why does it seem like the progress I hoped for remains invisible, no matter how hard I try to stay faithful? The mind begins searching for explanations. Perhaps the timing is wrong. Perhaps more patience is required. But as the months stretch into years, another possibility sometimes begins to form in the back of your thoughts. Maybe I misunderstood something. Maybe the direction I believed was from God was actually just my own imagination. This is one of the most difficult emotional crossroads a person can reach, because it does not come from rebellion or lack of faith. It comes from the painful distance between expectation and visible reality. When someone steps forward, believing that God has placed a purpose on their life, they often do so with courage and vulnerability. They share their dreams with loved ones. They take risks. They invest time, energy, and belief into something that cannot yet be seen. But when the results remain hidden for a long period of time, doubt begins to creep in through the small cracks created by disappointment. It does not arrive suddenly, like a storm. Instead, it grows slowly, like fog rolling across a landscape at dawn. At first, you can still see the path clearly. Then, gradually, the visibility begins to fade. You are still walking, but you can no longer see as far ahead as you once could. This emotional exhaustion is not a sign that something has gone wrong with your faith. In many cases, it is actually a sign that something significant is taking place beneath the surface of your life. Spiritual preparation often occurs in seasons that feel confusing or silent. When a seed is planted beneath the soil, nothing appears to happen for a long time. If someone were to examine the ground from above, they might assume the seed has disappeared or failed. But beneath that quiet surface, roots are forming. The structure that will eventually support growth is being developed in darkness, far away from public attention. In the same way, many of the most important transformations in a person's life occur during periods where progress cannot yet be measured or celebrated. Character deepens, perspective changes. The ego slowly loses its grip, replaced by humility and patience. These internal shifts rarely happen in moments of immediate success. They are usually formed during the slow and uncomfortable spaces between promise and fulfillment. Because of this, the fatigue you may be feeling right now does not automatically mean that your journey has reached a dead end. In fact, history and scripture repeatedly show that the most intense moments of discouragement often appear just before major turning points. When people reach the edge of their endurance, they also reach the edge of their transformation. It is the moment where old expectations finally collapse, making room for something larger and more surprising than the original plan. Breakthrough rarely arrives while everything feels comfortable and predictable. It often arrives after the long night of uncertainty, when a person has learned to keep walking even without clear evidence that the road will lead anywhere meaningful. So if you recognize yourself in this description, if you feel the quiet exhaustion of carrying hope through a long delay, understand that this moment is not the end of your story. It is part of a process that many individuals walk through before stepping into the purpose they were prepared to fulfill. The fatigue does not mean you are losing the journey. It means you have traveled far enough to reach the deeper stages of it. And sometimes the final stretch of the path appears precisely when the traveler believes they cannot take another step. What you are experiencing may not be the collapse of your calling. It may be the final threshold before something begins to shift in ways you could not have predicted while you were still standing in the long shadow of waiting. The biblical warning about losing heart appears in a passage that many people have heard countless times, yet very few have truly paused to understand its deeper meaning. In Galatians 6:9, the scripture says, "Let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart." At first glance, the verse seems simple, almost like gentle encouragement offered to someone who feels tired. But when the original language behind the words is explored more carefully, the message reveals something far more profound. The phrase translated as "lose heart" carries the meaning of mentally collapsing under pressure. It is not simply about feeling tired. It describes the moment when someone releases their internal grip on hope right before the breakthrough appears. In other words, the verse is not merely telling believers to stay positive. It is warning them about a specific psychological and spiritual danger that tends to appear at the most critical stage of the journey. To understand the weight of this warning, imagine a farmer standing in a field after months of labor. The soil has already been prepared, the seeds have already been planted, and the long process of waiting has almost reached its conclusion. The plants beneath the ground have already begun pushing upward toward the surface, even though the farmer cannot yet see them. Now imagine that the farmer becomes discouraged during the final days of waiting. Perhaps the ground still looks dry. Perhaps the weather appears uncertain. If the farmer decides to abandon the field at that moment, walking away just before the first green shoots break through the soil, all of the previous work would be wasted. The harvest was already forming beneath the surface, But discouragement caused the farmer to leave at the very moment when patience was most important. This is the image contained within the warning of Galatians. The danger is not simply fatigue. The danger is quitting when the outcome is already closer than you realize. This idea can also be understood through another powerful comparison. Imagine a marathon runner who has spent months training for a race. The runner has already covered 25 miles of the 26-mile journey. Muscles ache, breathing becomes heavy, and exhaustion begins to blur the focus of the mind. At that moment, the finish line is literally just around the corner. Yet if the runner collapses from discouragement during that final mile, the entire race remains unfinished. The tragedy would not be that the runner lacked strength. The tragedy would be that the runner stopped just before victory appeared. In the same way, spiritual journeys often contain a stage where fatigue reaches its highest intensity, precisely because the breakthrough is approaching. The enemy of progress understands this pattern very well. That is why discouragement tends to whisper its loudest lies near the end of the process, rather than at the beginning. Many people who carry a calling encounter this exact moment during their lives. They have invested years of faith, obedience, and persistence into a path they believed God placed before them. But when results remain hidden for longer than expected, their minds begin to reinterpret the silence. Doubt starts asking difficult questions. What if I misunderstood the direction? What if the promise was never real? What if all of this effort has been wasted? These thoughts do not always appear dramatically. Sometimes they arrive quietly, disguised as logic or practicality. The mind begins searching for ways to protect itself from disappointment. Walking away begins to feel safer than continuing forward without visible proof that the journey will lead somewhere meaningful. Yet the Scripture's warning reminds us that these thoughts often appear at the most dangerous moment of the entire process. The temptation to give up is rarely strongest at the beginning of a calling. In the early stages, there is excitement, vision, and anticipation. But as time passes and the road becomes long, endurance is tested in deeper ways. That is when the inner battle begins. Faith is no longer sustained by emotion or enthusiasm. Instead, it must be sustained by conviction. Conviction is quieter, steadier, and sometimes harder to maintain because it requires trusting what cannot yet be seen. The deeper message of Galatians 6:9 therefore becomes a call to spiritual endurance. It teaches that the harvest already exists within the timeline of the journey, even if it has not yet appeared in visible form. Seeds do not sprout immediately after they are planted. There is always a hidden stage where growth occurs beneath the surface before the results become visible. The warning against losing heart is therefore a reminder that the silence you experience during seasons of waiting does not mean that nothing is happening. It simply means that the process has moved underground, where your eyes cannot yet follow it. Understanding this truth changes how you interpret the fatigue you feel during long delays. Instead of seeing exhaustion as a signal to quit, it can be understood as evidence that you have traveled far enough to reach the deeper layers of the journey. The tension you feel between hope and discouragement is not unusual. It is part of the refining process that strengthens your ability to remain faithful when the path becomes uncertain. Spiritual endurance is not about pretending that the road is easy. It is about continuing to move forward, even when the finish line is hidden by distance. And this is the quiet encouragement hidden within the biblical warning. The harvest promised in the verse is not theoretical. It is described as something that will certainly arrive in its proper season. The only condition attached to that promise is perseverance. If you refuse to surrender your hope during the final stretch of the journey, the outcome will eventually reveal itself. What appears today as silence may simply be the last chapter before the story turns in a direction you could not yet imagine. The Joseph delay and divine preparation provide one of the clearest examples in Scripture of how a promise from God can travel through seasons that appear completely opposite to the destiny it foretells. When people hear the story of Joseph, they often remember the dramatic ending, the moment when he stands before Pharaoh and is elevated to a position of immense influence in Egypt. Yet what is frequently overlooked is the long and confusing path that existed between the dream and its fulfillment. Joseph's journey did not move in a straight line toward success. In fact, from the outside, it appeared as though everything in his life was moving in the wrong direction. This is why the story remains so powerful for anyone who has ever carried a dream that seemed delayed by circumstances beyond their control. Joseph's experience reminds us that divine preparation often unfolds in ways that human logic cannot immediately understand. Joseph's story begins with a vision that seemed almost impossible for a young man to imagine. He dreamed that one day he would rise into a position of authority and influence, a future where even those around him would recognize the favor resting on his life. But the moment Joseph shared that dream, the first stage of opposition appeared. His brothers did not celebrate the possibility of his future. Instead, jealousy began to grow in their hearts. The dream that should have signaled the beginning of Joseph's rise instead triggered betrayal. His own brothers threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and removed him from the family environment that once felt familiar. From a human perspective, this moment looked like the complete collapse of Joseph's destiny. The dream had promised elevation, yet Joseph's reality now involved chains, foreign land, and servitude. Many people in that situation would have concluded that the dream was a mistake. They might have assumed that the vision was simply youthful imagination, rather than divine direction. Yet Joseph's journey did not stop at slavery. Even in the house where he served faithfully, another unexpected setback arrived. False accusations placed him in prison, a place where freedom disappeared, and hope could easily fade into bitterness. At this stage of the story, the contrast between promise and reality becomes almost unbearable. A young man who once dreamed of leadership now finds himself isolated behind stone walls, surrounded by the consequences of circumstances he did not create. If Joseph had measured his life purely by visible progress, it would have appeared that the dream had been completely abandoned. But what Joseph could not see during those moments was the deeper work unfolding inside him. The prison that looked like punishment was actually functioning as preparation. The isolation that felt like rejection was shaping the humility, patience, and wisdom necessary for the position he would eventually hold. One of the most revealing moments in Joseph's story occurs while he is still in prison. There he encounters two officials from Pharaoh's court who are troubled by dreams they cannot understand. Joseph listens carefully and interprets their dreams with clarity and accuracy. One of the men, the cupbearer, receives good news through Joseph's interpretation and is restored to his former position in Pharaoh's palace. Before the man leaves prison, Joseph makes a simple request. He asks the cupbearer to remember him and mention his situation to Pharaoh. In Joseph's mind, this must have seemed like the moment when the long delay would finally end. The door to freedom appeared to be opening. A connection had been formed with someone close to the king. Surely this was the opportunity that would bring his suffering to an end. But the scripture records a heartbreaking detail. The cupbearer forgot Joseph. Days passed, then months, and eventually 2 full years slipped by in silence. This moment represents what many people experience in their own journeys. The painful space between promise and fulfillment, where everything seems to pause without explanation. Joseph remained in prison long after the opportunity to leave seemed within reach. From the outside, this delay appeared unnecessary and unfair. Yet the deeper lesson of the story reveals that the timing of Joseph's release had to align perfectly with the moment when Pharaoh himself would need Joseph's gift. If Joseph had been released earlier through the cupbearer's memory, he might have simply returned to ordinary life. But the delay positioned him to stand before Pharaoh at the exact moment when his ability to interpret dreams would become the key to saving an entire nation from famine. This is the profound truth hidden within the Joseph delay. Divine preparation is rarely comfortable, and it often takes place in environments that feel disconnected from the promise we once believed. But those seasons are shaping something within us that cannot be formed through ease or immediate success. Leadership requires wisdom. Influence requires humility. Authority requires the ability to remain faithful, even when recognition is absent. All of these qualities were being forged within Joseph during the years when it appeared that nothing was happening. What looked like stagnation was actually refinement. What felt like abandonment was actually alignment with a moment that had not yet arrived. Joseph eventually stepped out of prison, not as the same young man who first dreamed of greatness, but as someone who had been strengthened by adversity and tempered by patience. The delay did not destroy his destiny. It prepared him to carry it without arrogance or revenge. When he finally rose into power, he used that position not to punish those who had betrayed him, but to preserve life and provide stability during a crisis that threatened the entire region. The dream that once seemed distant and impossible was fulfilled in a way that revealed the wisdom of the delay. And for anyone who finds themselves in a season where promises appear postponed, Joseph's story stands as a reminder that divine preparation is often unfolding precisely in the places where we least expect it. Refinement before promotion is a pattern that appears again and again throughout the deeper narratives of Scripture and human experience. And the life of Joseph illustrates this truth with remarkable clarity. When people read about the hardships Joseph endured, it is easy to assume that those difficulties were a form of punishment or divine displeasure. Yet the broader context of the story reveals something entirely different. The trials Joseph experienced were not signs that he had failed God, nor were they evidence that his dream had been rejected. Instead, they were part of a refining process that prepared him for a level of influence that would eventually affect entire nations. What appeared at first as delay, betrayal, and confinement was actually the environment where his character was being forged into something strong enough to sustain the weight of leadership. To understand this process more clearly, it is helpful to consider the ancient Hebrew concept of testing that appears throughout the biblical narrative. The word used in many passages does not describe a simple examination meant to determine whether someone passes or fails. Instead, it refers to a process similar to the refining of precious metal. In ancient metallurgy, gold was placed into intense fire so that impurities hidden within the metal could rise to the surface and be removed. This process was not quick, comfortable, or gentle. The heat had to reach a level strong enough to separate what was valuable from what was flawed. Only after the impurities were burned away could the gold reveal its full brilliance and strength. The metal that emerged from that fire was far more valuable than it had been before the refining began. In the same way, the trials Joseph experienced functioned like the fire in a refiner's furnace. When Joseph first received his dreams as a young man, he possessed vision, but not yet the depth of wisdom required to carry authority. His early enthusiasm even revealed traces of youthful pride. Sharing his dreams openly with brothers who already struggled with jealousy only intensified their resentment. If Joseph had been elevated to power immediately after receiving those visions, The influence placed in his hands might have amplified immaturity rather than wisdom. The refining process that followed through slavery and imprisonment slowly transformed him from an ambitious dreamer into a leader capable of humility, patience, and restraint. Each hardship removed another layer of pride, replacing it with compassion and maturity. This truth reveals an important principle about promotion. Influence without preparation can be dangerous. Authority magnifies the character of the person who holds it. If that character is still dominated by ego, insecurity, or the desire for revenge, the power that should benefit others can instead cause harm. History provides countless examples of individuals who rose quickly into positions of leadership, only to collapse under the pressure of their own unrefined character. Without the internal strength to handle success responsibly, recognition can distort judgment and invite destructive choices. That is why divine preparation often unfolds slowly. The delay is not designed to prevent success, but to ensure that success becomes sustainable once it arrives. Joseph's story shows that refinement does not occur through comfort. It occurs through circumstances that challenge the heart and reveal hidden weaknesses. When Joseph was sold into slavery, he had to learn obedience and discipline in a place where no one recognized his destiny. When he was falsely accused and imprisoned, he had to confront the injustice of suffering for something he did not do. Each of these experiences forced him to develop resilience and faith in situations where bitterness could easily have taken root. Yet Joseph chose to remain faithful, even when the environment around him seemed hostile and unfair. This choice gradually shaped him into a person who could later wield authority without becoming corrupted by it. By the time Joseph stood before Pharaoh, interpreting the dreams that would change the course of Egypt's future, he had already been transformed by years of refining. The arrogance of youth had been replaced by humility. The impulse to prove himself had been replaced by the wisdom to serve a greater purpose. Instead of seeking revenge against those who had wronged him, Joseph demonstrated mercy and strategic insight that ultimately preserved countless lives during the coming famine. The promotion he received was not simply a reward for surviving hardship. It was the natural result of the transformation that hardship had produced within him. The fire that once seemed destructive had actually purified his character until it reflected the strength required for leadership. For anyone walking through a season that feels similar to Joseph's refining process, this perspective can completely change the meaning of present struggles. The difficulties you are facing may not be obstacles placed in your path to prevent progress. They may be the very tools shaping you into someone capable of carrying greater responsibility. Every moment where patience is required, every situation where humility must replace pride, every challenge that forces you to grow beyond your previous limitations is part of a preparation that cannot occur in comfort alone. The fire may feel intense while you are inside it, but the purpose of that fire is not destruction. Its purpose is transformation. When the refining process is complete, the person who emerges from it is not the same person who entered it. Strength replaces fragility. Clarity replaces confusion. And when promotion finally arrives, it rests on a foundation strong enough to sustain it. This is why the difficult season you have been walking through should not automatically be interpreted as failure or delay without purpose. It may be the stage where the deeper qualities of your character are being shaped, the qualities that will allow you to handle influence with integrity when the moment of elevation finally appears. The refining may feel long, but its outcome is a life capable of carrying the responsibility that once existed only as a distant promise. The law of divine compensation, often expressed through the Hebrew concept of shalom, introduces a perspective that transforms the way we interpret loss, delay, and hardship. Many people understand the idea of restoration. Restoration usually means returning something to its original state, replacing what was lost so that life can continue from the same point where the damage occurred. But the deeper meaning contained within the word shalom goes far beyond simple restoration. In the ancient Hebrew understanding, shalom carries the legal and relational sense of making something whole through repayment, compensation, and reconciliation. It describes a situation where loss is not merely reversed, but repaid with increase. When something has been stolen, damaged, or delayed, the process of shalom requires that the repayment reflect not only the original value, but also the cost of the suffering, stress, and time that was lost in the process. In other words, shalom is not about returning to zero. It is about moving forward into a place where the outcome surpasses the original starting point. Understanding this concept changes the emotional landscape for anyone who has endured a long season of struggle. Many people look back at difficult years and feel as though those years have been wasted. They remember the sacrifices they made, the opportunities that slipped away, and the prayers that seemed unanswered. In those moments, it can feel as though life has quietly taken something away that will never be returned. But the principle of shalom introduces a different interpretation of the same story. Instead of seeing hardship as a subtraction from the future, it reveals that every sacrifice is quietly accumulating value. Each tear, each moment of perseverance, each decision to remain faithful in circumstances where walking away would have been easier, is being recorded in a way that cannot yet be measured by visible results. The spiritual economy does not operate according to immediate outcomes. It operates according to seeds planted over time. Imagine an arrow being pulled backward into the bowstring. From the outside, the backward movement may look like retreat. Someone observing that motion might assume the arrow is moving away from its target rather than toward it. But the archer understands that the backward tension is necessary for the arrow to travel farther once it is released. The deeper the pull, the greater the momentum that follows. In many ways, the seasons of delay and difficulty that people experience function in a similar manner. The backward tension created by hardship is not always a sign that life is moving away from its purpose. Instead, it may be the preparation required for a level of acceleration that would not have been possible without that tension. The principle of shalom suggests that nothing endured with faith is ever truly lost. Even when circumstances appear stagnant, something is accumulating beneath the surface. Every act of patience is strengthening character. Every moment of endurance is building resilience. Every disappointment that did not destroy your faith is adding depth to your capacity to handle future responsibility. These elements may not look like blessings while they are forming, but they are quietly building the internal structure necessary for greater opportunities. When the time of fulfillment arrives, those hidden investments begin to reveal their value in ways that often exceed the original expectation. This is why many of the greatest turning points in life arrive with an element of acceleration. Years of slow preparation can suddenly unfold into opportunities that seem to appear almost overnight. To outside observers, it may look as though success arrived quickly or unexpectedly. They see the moment when doors open, recognition appears, or provision begins to flow. What they do not see are the years of unseen preparation that made that moment possible. The law of divine compensation means that the quiet years were not empty. They were storing momentum that will eventually be released in a concentrated form. Scripture repeatedly reflects this pattern. The stories of individuals who walked through prolonged hardship often end with outcomes that extend far beyond the original promise. The restoration they experience does not simply erase the past, but transforms it into a testimony of resilience and divine timing. When Shalom begins to unfold, the narrative changes from one of loss to one of redemption. What once appeared to be wasted time becomes the foundation for something greater. The very experiences that once caused pain begin to serve a purpose in shaping wisdom, compassion, and authority. For someone standing in the middle of a long delay, this perspective offers a different kind of hope. Hope does not come from denying the reality of hardship, but from recognizing that hardship does not have the final word. The years that seemed silent were not meaningless. They were accumulating value in ways that could not yet be seen. The struggles you endured were not subtracting from your future. They were quietly adding weight to the blessing that will eventually arrive. When the principle of Shalom unfolds, the outcome often surprises even the person who endured the waiting. What once felt like loss begins to reveal itself as preparation for a greater level of provision, influence, or opportunity than originally imagined. This is why the promise connected to divine compensation carries such profound encouragement. The future reward is not designed merely to repair what was broken. It is meant to exceed what was lost. The years of struggle are not erased from your story, but they become the very reason the coming season carries greater meaning. What lies ahead will not simply replace what disappeared during the waiting. It will reveal that the waiting itself was quietly building the foundation for something far more expansive than you could have recognized while you were still walking through it. Preparing the mind to receive is a step that many people overlook when they think about breakthrough. Yet it may be one of the most important transitions a person can make after a long season of struggle. People often imagine that when a blessing is finally released, it will automatically change everything. They picture the moment when doors open, when opportunities appear, when the answers to years of prayer suddenly arrive. But there is a hidden principle operating beneath those moments that is rarely discussed. Even when blessings are released, the receiver must be internally ready to recognize them, interpret them correctly, and respond with wisdom. If the inner condition of the mind is still shaped by fear, exhaustion, and survival thinking, a person may stand directly in front of the opportunity they have been praying for and still fail to see it for what it is. This is why the preparation of the mind becomes such a crucial stage of the journey. Long seasons of hardship have a powerful effect on the human nervous system. When someone spends years navigating uncertainty, disappointment, financial pressure, emotional strain, or unanswered prayers, the brain adapts to that environment. It becomes trained to expect difficulty. The body releases stress hormones more frequently. The mind becomes alert to threats and potential problems. Psychologists often describe this state as survival mode. In survival mode, the brain prioritizes protection above everything else. It scans constantly for danger. It analyzes risks. It focuses on immediate problems that must be solved in order to keep life moving forward. This response is not a flaw in the design of the human mind. In fact, it is an extraordinary mechanism created to help people survive crises. When a person is facing danger, the brain must react quickly and decisively. Survival mode helps individuals respond to urgent situations where hesitation could be harmful. But the difficulty arises when survival mode becomes the permanent operating state of the mind. When someone remains under pressure for long periods of time, the brain begins to treat stress as normal. Even when the immediate crisis has passed, the nervous system continues behaving as if danger is still present. Thoughts become dominated by worry, analysis, and anticipation of problems that may never occur. The mind becomes so focused on avoiding loss that it struggles to imagine possibility. In this state, opportunities can appear unfamiliar or even suspicious. Instead of recognizing a new path forward, the brain instinctively searches for reasons why that path might fail. Creativity decreases. Intuition becomes quiet. The imagination that once dreamed of new possibilities becomes overshadowed by the habit of protecting against disappointment. This is why preparing the mind to receive is not simply a spiritual concept, but also a psychological transformation. When the brain has been conditioned by years of struggle, it must gradually learn how to move out of survival mode and into a state of calm awareness. In calmer states of mind, different cognitive abilities begin to awaken. Creativity becomes more accessible. The brain forms connections between ideas that were previously invisible. Intuition begins to speak more clearly. People often describe intuition as a quiet sense of knowing that emerges without forcing or overthinking. It is the subtle recognition of patterns and insights that arise when the mind is relaxed enough to observe rather than constantly defend. Many of the greatest discoveries, inventions, and moments of clarity in human history have occurred during states of calm reflection rather than frantic effort. Consider the way the mind functions during moments of deep concentration or peaceful contemplation. When the nervous system is relaxed, the brain begins operating in rhythms that support imagination, learning, and insight. Artists, scientists, and spiritual teachers throughout history have recognized the importance of these mental states. Some access them through prayer, meditation, long walks, music, or quiet solitude. In those moments, the mind is no longer locked in defensive patterns. Instead, it becomes receptive. It notices details that previously escaped attention. It begins connecting ideas in ways that generate new understanding. The same mind that once felt overwhelmed by stress suddenly becomes capable of seeing solutions that had been hidden in plain sight. For someone who has walked through a long season of hardship, learning how to return to this receptive state can feel unfamiliar at first. The mind may resist relaxation because it has grown accustomed to constant vigilance. Thoughts may continue racing even when the external circumstances begin to improve. Yet this transition is essential because divine direction often arrives quietly rather than dramatically. Guidance rarely appears in the form of thunder or overwhelming signs. More often it emerges as a subtle nudge, a gentle impression, an idea that surfaces during a moment of reflection. If the mind is still operating at the frantic pace of survival thinking, those signals may be overlooked entirely. Preparing the mind to receive, therefore, involves intentionally creating space for calm awareness. This does not require abandoning responsibility or ignoring real challenges. Instead, it involves developing moments where the mind is allowed to slow down enough to observe rather than react. Simple practices such as quiet prayer, reflection, breathing exercises, or stepping away from constant digital stimulation can gradually retrain the nervous system. These moments allow the body to release tension and remind the brain that it no longer needs to operate in constant alarm. Over time, the mind begins rediscovering its natural capacity for creativity and perception. As this shift occurs, something remarkable often happens. Opportunities that once seemed invisible begin to appear. Conversations lead to unexpected connections. Ideas emerge that inspire new directions. Doors that previously looked closed reveal hidden entrances. None of these developments happen because the external world suddenly changed overnight. They happen because the internal lens through which the world is viewed has shifted. When the mind becomes calm and receptive, it gains the ability to recognize patterns and possibilities that were previously obscured by stress. The blessing may have been approaching for some time, but the receiver needed the clarity to see it and the wisdom to respond appropriately. This is why the preparation of the mind is closely connected to the fulfillment of promises. The blessing itself may already be in motion, but the mind must be capable of receiving it without fear or confusion. If someone approaches new opportunities while still dominated by survival thinking, they may reject the very door they prayed would open. But when the mind learns to rest in confidence rather than panic, it becomes able to discern the difference between distraction and divine direction. In this way, the journey through hardship serves a deeper purpose. The struggles you endured may have strengthened resilience, but the next stage of the journey requires something equally powerful: inner peace. Peace does not mean the absence of challenges. It means the presence of clarity, even when uncertainty still exists. When the mind reaches this state, it becomes aligned with a rhythm that allows guidance to be recognized and wisdom to emerge naturally. The noise of fear begins to fade, and in that quiet space, the direction you have been seeking can finally become clear. The door that once seemed hidden begins to reveal itself, not because it suddenly appeared, but because you have reached the place where you are finally able to see it. Preparing the mind to receive is not simply a mental adjustment, but a profound internal transition that changes the way a person interprets reality itself. Many people spend years asking God to open doors, release provision, or send clarity about the next step in their lives. Yet what is often overlooked is that the mind receiving that answer must be capable of recognizing it when it appears. A blessing does not always arrive wrapped in obvious signs or dramatic announcements. Sometimes it appears quietly through a conversation, an unexpected idea, a relationship, or a sudden opportunity that at first seems ordinary. If the mind is still conditioned by years of disappointment and survival thinking, it may overlook these openings entirely. This is why the preparation of the mind becomes so essential. Even when blessings are released, the receiver must be internally ready to recognize and respond to them. To understand this more clearly, it is important to consider how prolonged hardship affects the human mind. When someone has walked through years of uncertainty, financial stress, emotional pressure, or repeated disappointment, the nervous system adapts to that environment. The brain becomes trained to anticipate difficulty. It learns to operate in a heightened state of alertness, where the primary goal is protection rather than exploration. Scientists often describe this as a prolonged survival response. In survival mode, the brain releases stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline more frequently. These chemicals sharpen attention and help the body react quickly in moments of danger. From an evolutionary perspective, this response is incredibly valuable. It helped our ancestors survive threats in unpredictable environments. But the same response that protects us in crisis can limit our ability to perceive opportunity when it becomes constant. When the brain remains locked in survival mode for extended periods of time, several subtle changes occur. The mind begins focusing almost exclusively on immediate problems that must be solved. Long-term thinking becomes more difficult because the brain is busy scanning for potential threats. Creativity declines because imagination requires a level of calm that survival mode does not allow. Even perception changes. The brain begins filtering information through a lens of caution and skepticism. Opportunities that could lead to growth may initially appear risky or unrealistic. Guidance that once felt inspiring may now seem uncertain or impractical. In other words, the same mind that once dreamed boldly can gradually become trained to protect itself from disappointment rather than pursue possibility. This is why preparing the mind to receive is not merely a spiritual concept, but a necessary transformation of perspective. If the internal environment of the mind remains dominated by fear and exhaustion, it becomes difficult to recognize the subtle ways in which answers begin to arrive. Divine direction rarely shouts over the noise of stress. It often emerges through quiet impressions that surface when the mind becomes still enough to notice them. Throughout history, many individuals who experienced profound insight described moments when their thoughts slowed down and clarity suddenly appeared. A scientist might encounter a breakthrough idea while walking in nature. A writer might discover the direction of a story while sitting quietly with a notebook. A spiritual leader might receive guidance during prayer or meditation. These moments share a common characteristic. The mind has temporarily stepped out of survival mode and entered a state of calm awareness. In calmer states of consciousness, different cognitive abilities begin to awaken. They become capable of stepping back and asking deeper questions, rather than immediately assuming the worst outcome. In this way, the preparation of the mind becomes closely connected to wisdom. Wisdom often emerges when a person has the space to reflect rather than react. It allows them to see beyond immediate circumstances and recognize the larger pattern unfolding in their lives. Create an idea that appeared insignificant may grow into a path forward. Connections between people and opportunities begin to form in ways that previously seemed unlikely. Many people describe this stage as if the world itself suddenly became more responsive. Yet in reality, the change often occurs within the observer rather than the environment. The opportunities were present before, but the mind was too overwhelmed to recognize them. When a person develops the ability to remain calm even while navigating uncertainty, they become capable of seeing the path ahead more clearly than someone who is reacting from fear. Peace creates the internal space where guidance can be heard. It allows the mind to discern the difference between distraction and true opportunity. When this transformation takes place, the relationship between effort and outcome begins to change. Instead of forcing every situation through sheer willpower, a person begins noticing where doors are already opening. They become sensitive to the flow of events rather than constantly struggling against them. Decisions are made with greater confidence because they emerge from clarity rather than panic. This is what it truly means to prepare the mind to receive. It is not about abandoning action, but about aligning action with awareness. And perhaps most importantly, this shift restores something that long seasons of hardship often diminish: the ability to trust again. Trust does not mean ignoring past disappointments. It means recognizing that those experiences shaped resilience without permanently defining the future. As the mind becomes calm and receptive, hope begins to reappear in a quieter but stronger form. Instead of demanding immediate proof, hope becomes the steady confidence that the path ahead is unfolding with purpose. In this way, preparing the mind becomes the bridge between promise and fulfillment. The blessing may already be moving toward you, but the mind must be capable of recognizing it and stepping forward with clarity when it arrives. When fear and survival thinking finally loosen their grip, the same life that once looked uncertain begins to reveal new direction. The silence that once felt empty begins to carry meaning. And what once appeared as a closed path slowly opens into a road that was waiting all along for the moment when your mind was finally ready to walk it. Protecting the breakthrough becomes the next essential stage once the long season of waiting begins to shift and the answers you have hoped for finally start to appear. Many people imagine that the hardest part of a journey is surviving the delay, enduring the silence, and continuing to believe when progress seems invisible. Yet there is another challenge that emerges once the breakthrough actually arrives. When the door finally opens, the moment is often accompanied by excitement, relief, and a rush of emotion. Years of anticipation suddenly collide with reality. What was once a distant hope becomes a tangible opportunity standing directly in front of you. In those moments, wisdom and patience become more important than ever. Because the first stage of any breakthrough is often the most fragile. Just as a seed that has finally pushed through the soil must still be protected while its roots strengthen, a new opportunity must be guarded carefully during its earliest days. When something significant begins unfolding in your life, the natural human response is to celebrate immediately and share the news with everyone around you. After all, you may have spent years explaining to others why you believed a certain promise would eventually come to pass. You may have endured moments when people questioned your vision or quietly assumed that your hopes would never materialize. When the breakthrough finally arrives, it can feel tempting to announce it quickly, almost as if proving to the world that your faith was justified. But wisdom invites a different response. The earliest moments of transformation require calm reflection rather than immediate exposure. This is why the idea of the 3-day silence protocol carries such deep meaning. Instead of rushing to broadcast your success, the protocol encourages you to pause, step back, and sit quietly with what has happened. The purpose of this silence is not secrecy born from fear, but intentional reflection born from wisdom. During the first moments of breakthrough, emotions can be intense. Relief, excitement, gratitude, and even disbelief can rush through your thoughts all at once. In that emotional atmosphere, it becomes easy to make decisions quickly without fully examining the long-term consequences. Silence creates the space where clarity can emerge. By stepping away from the noise of public reaction, you give yourself time to listen carefully to your own intuition and seek guidance about how the new opportunity should unfold. Those quiet moments allow you to examine details, ask deeper questions, and recognize potential complications that might otherwise remain hidden. History offers many examples of people who encountered a major opportunity and rushed into it without reflection, only to discover later that the opportunity contained hidden challenges. When excitement moves faster than wisdom, individuals may commit to agreements, partnerships, or decisions that compromise their long-term purpose. Silence acts as a protective pause that allows the mind to shift from emotional reaction into thoughtful discernment. During those quiet days, you begin observing the opportunity from different angles. You consider not only what it offers in the present moment, but also how it might shape the future. In that space of reflection, clarity often reveals itself in ways that excitement alone cannot produce. Another reason the silence period is valuable is that it protects the breakthrough from unnecessary external influence. When people hear about a sudden success, their reactions can vary widely. Some will celebrate sincerely, offering encouragement and support. Others may respond with skepticism, envy, or subtle attempts to redirect the situation toward their own interests. Even well-meaning advice can create confusion if it arrives too early, before you have fully understood the opportunity yourself. The voices of others can become so loud that they drown out the quiet inner guidance that first led you to this moment. By maintaining temporary silence, you allow the breakthrough to mature in a protected environment, where your own understanding can develop before outside opinions begin shaping your perspective. This leads to another important aspect of protecting the breakthrough: discernment about who receives access to your new opportunities. Not every person who suddenly appears during your moment of success has the same intentions or perspective. Some individuals who were absent during the long season of waiting may now reappear with enthusiasm, eager to participate in the rewards of your progress. While many of these people may genuinely wish you well, others may be drawn primarily by the benefits that your new position offers. This does not mean you must approach every relationship with suspicion, but it does mean that wisdom is required when deciding who becomes part of your inner circle. Access to your vision and opportunities is a privilege, not an automatic right granted to everyone who expresses interest. Discernment helps you recognize the difference between relationships that strengthen your purpose and those that quietly drain your energy. People who walked beside you during seasons of uncertainty often carry a deeper understanding of your journey. They have witnessed the patience, humility, and persistence that shaped the path you walked. These individuals tend to respect the responsibility that comes with your breakthrough, because they remember the struggles that preceded it. In contrast, those who appear only when success becomes visible may lack that deeper perspective. They may see only the reward without understanding the discipline required to sustain it. Allowing too many voices into your decision-making process too quickly can create confusion and pressure that distracts from the wisdom needed to steward the opportunity well. Protecting the breakthrough, therefore, requires healthy boundaries. Boundaries are not walls built to isolate yourself from others, but filters that help you decide how your energy and attention are distributed. A person who has just stepped into a new season of opportunity must remain focused on understanding the responsibilities that come with it. That focus can easily become scattered if the mind becomes overwhelmed by the expectations and opinions of too many people. Boundaries create the structure necessary for clarity. They allow you to listen to guidance, evaluate decisions carefully, and move forward with confidence rather than reacting to external pressure. It is also important to remember that breakthroughs often attract challenges alongside opportunities. Growth changes the environment around you. New responsibilities introduce unfamiliar situations that require learning and adaptation. Some individuals may resist the changes taking place in your life, particularly if those changes alter the dynamics of existing relationships. Others may test the limits of your generosity or attempt to attach themselves to your success in ways that create imbalance. Boundaries act as the guardrails that help you navigate this new landscape with stability. They allow you to remain generous and compassionate without losing control of your direction. Ultimately, protecting the breakthrough is not about living in fear of losing what has been given. It is about honoring the process that brought you to this moment. The same patience and wisdom that helped you endure the long season of waiting must now guide the decisions you make during the season of fulfillment. Silence creates the space for clarity. Discernment protects the vision from unnecessary interference. Boundaries ensure that your energy remains aligned with the purpose that the breakthrough was meant to serve. When these elements work together, the blessing you have received becomes something more than a sudden moment of success. It becomes the beginning of a sustainable new chapter in your life. Instead of fading quickly under pressure, the breakthrough grows stronger with time because it is supported by wisdom rather than impulse. The journey that once felt uncertain begins to reveal a deeper pattern of guidance and preparation. And as you move forward with patience and clarity, the opportunity that once appeared fragile begins to establish itself as a foundation for everything that will unfold in the seasons ahead. Stepping into the new season begins with a quiet but powerful shift inside the heart and mind. After walking through the long road of waiting, refinement, and preparation, the moment arrives where the story begins to change direction. This conclusion is not simply the end of a message, but a symbolic activation of a new chapter in your life. Everything that has been discussed so far, the exhaustion of delay, the warning not to lose heart, the example of Joseph's preparation, the refining process that shaped character, the promise of divine compensation, the importance of preparing the mind to receive, and the wisdom required to protect a breakthrough, has been leading toward this turning point. It is the moment where reflection becomes movement. It is the moment where the years of preparation begin transforming into purposeful action. Imagine for a moment the image of someone sitting in a quiet room after a long battle. The weight of discouragement has been resting on their shoulders for years. The questions that once haunted their thoughts made them feel as if the path forward had disappeared. Yet now, something inside them begins to shift. Instead of remaining seated in the posture of defeat, they slowly stand up. The act of standing may appear simple, but symbolically, it represents something far deeper. Rising from that seat means releasing the identity formed during the season of struggle. It means recognizing that the delay did not define your destiny. It means accepting that the preparation you endured has equipped you for something greater than the situation that once confined you. In your mind's eye, picture yourself rising from that place. Straighten your posture. Lift your head. Feel the quiet confidence returning to your spirit. This is the posture of someone who understands that the season of testing has served its purpose. With that shift comes the declaration that the refining season has reached its conclusion. The long period where patience was required above all else is giving way to a phase where influence begins to grow. The lessons learned during the hidden years are not being left behind. Instead, they become the foundation for how you will move forward. The humility developed during difficult moments will shape the way you handle success. The resilience formed through waiting will strengthen your ability to remain steady when responsibilities increase. Everything that once felt like delay now reveals itself as preparation for a greater level of stewardship. The new season does not erase the past. It transforms the past into wisdom that guides the future. Stepping into this new chapter also carries an invitation to responsibility. Blessings are never given merely for personal comfort or recognition. Influence, opportunity, and provision always carry the potential to impact others. When doors begin to open in your life, they create pathways not only for your own growth, but also for the people who will be touched by your actions, your leadership, and your example. This is why the final step in this transition involves a conscious commitment. The question quietly placed before you is simple but profound. If the opportunities you have been praying for begin to unfold, how will you use them? Will you allow success to shape your character negatively? Or will you use the lessons of the past to guide your decisions with integrity and wisdom? Accepting this calling means recognizing that the new season is not only about receiving blessings, but also about stewarding them well. Stewardship means handling opportunities with care, honoring the responsibilities attached to them, and remaining grounded in the values that sustained you during the difficult years. It means remembering that the strength you developed during the season of waiting was not accidental. It was the training that prepared you to handle influence with maturity. By embracing that responsibility, you transformed the breakthrough from a temporary moment of success into a lasting platform for meaningful impact. And so the transition from waiting to walking begins with agreement. Agreement that the past season has accomplished its purpose. Agreement that the lessons learned along the journey will guide the decisions you make moving forward. Agreement that the opportunities approaching your life will be used wisely and with gratitude. When you accept that agreement within your spirit, something shifts internally. You are no longer standing at the edge of your destiny, wondering when it will arrive. You are stepping onto the path where it begins unfolding through your actions, your choices, and your faith. The waiting season may have shaped you, but it no longer defines your position. You have moved from watching the promise in the distance to actively participating in its fulfillment. The new season is not simply approaching, it has already begun. And with every step you take forward, you are learning what it means to walk in the destiny that was quietly preparing for you all along.